My name is Ricardo Cortez. I'm a part of the United Lowrider Council. I specialize in youth education about lowrider history. And I am honored to be sitting down here today with Mr. Mario Madrid, who is the son of Sonny Madrid, founder of Lowrider Magazine. Proud son of San Jose. Yes, very significant to San Jose history and lowrider history globally. So we're going to dig in today a little bit about his expertise. So us as historians and collectors of magazines and whatnot, I think it's really important for us to understand the context of how things were invented, how they were made, and the importance of the time frame of which they came from. And I think there's no better expert than having Mario here. So you want to introduce yourself or say anything?
Hello. Okay. Okay, so if I get too muffled, let me know, or some gesture to me, because I know I have a little bit of a raspy voice a little bit sometimes. So, but I want to say thank you to Rick, for inviting me here and giving me this opportunity to basically represent my dad. He passed away in 2015, so he can't be here, but I'm sure he would have enjoyed it. Yeah, so I mean, I don't consider myself an expert, but I'll do my best.
I appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
So your dad, he was not originally from San Jose, was he?
No, he wasn't.
Okay, so where was he born?
He was born in Yuma, and he kind of grew up in Parlier, which is by Fresno. And he came to San Jose in the early 60s, I believe.
So what was his, I guess, involvement then being influenced by the Chicano movement, right? Because you said he was very involved in it.
Yeah, very.
To say the least.
Say the least, yeah. I think for me, whenever I talk about him, I like to, like Ricardo knows, I'm all about context and how things work together, how the whole picture. So for me to say he started off like this in the Chicano movement, it's kind of like you have to understand who he was as a person. Mm-hmm. And who he was as a person was that he was very involved with his community. Just as a regular person growing up, you get involved yourself with your neighbors, your friends, your schoolmates, whatever. And that was him. He worked like that. And so when he came into contact with the movement in college, it was that personality was just let loose in that environment, so to speak. He learned how to organize and do things like that, but it was already, in my opinion, it was natural to him to be able to do that, right? To take on something at a grassroots level like that. And, to learn from a lot of the San Jose legends, Sofia Mendoza, the CSO, from Cesar Chavez to, Fred Ross Jr. and, Jack Brito, all these people that were very important to that movement, the Confederation, Ernestina Garcia, Rachel Silva, all these elders. I mean, they were his elders at that time. But that was like the foundation of him learning the movement stuff, and also a lot of other ways that I guess we'll talk about. But so for him, I feel like it was just applying his personality into that grassroots mobilization and reaching out and things like that.
Okay. So he goes to San Jose State and he gets a degree in journalism?
Yeah. Well, he started off in San Jose City first. Okay. And it was during that time he became involved with MASC, which was an umbrella group of what became MECHA in the Bay Area. So MASC was the Bay Area coalition of student groups, and this is about 68 that he was involved with this. And wait, I'm sorry, what was your question?
So he studies journalism, right? So he goes into
so he gets involved with the publication El Machete, which is the MASC publication of the time. It's like a newspaper, maybe 5 or 6 pages, I think, or something like that. And he gets involved with that, and that's his first introduction to journalism. And so then he decides that's what I want to do. So initially it was, like a lot of people during that time, you have to remember the Vietnam War is going on. The people of color are starting to realize that they're dying, disproportionately in the war. So the students are starting to get active about this. And that's kind of like where it starts for him. Mm-hmm. And plus, his elder sister was going there, Lydia. Actually, you mentioned Augie, mm-hmm. It's his mom.
Okay.
So he told me that she was first, and then he followed her into it. And then, of course, my Uncle Rudy and my Aunt Irene after, mm-hmm. or around the same time. So I had 4 of them in there,
Okay.
Um, but it was at that point where he realized, like again, who he was as a person was that he liked to communicate. He liked to have a whole lot of friends of different walks of life. He didn't limit himself to one kind of person, one neighborhood, this kind of thing. So I feel that's I'm losing my train of thought.
It's all good. No So the reason why I bring up that question about journalism and getting into print media, right, as opposed to radio or TV, is that on the screen here we have 3 magazines that you pointed out to me are hugely important to him, and the third one obviously is one of his creations.
All right.
So could you talk about, I guess, these 3 magazines, how they relate and how they kind of lead up to Lowrider magazine?
Okay. So El Marcialo was the UFW publication, and he was a writer, or I believe he might have did some art with them. And this is in '68. So he started with that. But another magazine that's not on here that influenced him a lot was uh, shoot, what is the one from San Jose?
Eccentrical.
El Excentrico. That one. So that one was all about community, and it was for the Mexican population that was here by them. Galarza did it, I believe, Humberto Galarza,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's something that's not on here that also influenced him as far as including community. And then Gonzalez was a so like I was saying, he started off with El Machete, and he was involved with 2 more publications, Bronce and La Palabra. So those were more like student oriented things, Chicano stuff that was going on, but a lot of it was movement based or scholastic, the concerns of the students in their movement. Gonzalez was also in that vein, but it included a lot of outside things in it. So it dealt a lot with police brutality issues that were affecting the neighborhoods. So and that was from LA. So that inspired him to move out of just the general student activism into community also, as far as like the barrio content. And that's kind of what led to Trucha, that was all mostly his doing, or probably was his doing. The other ones, he was part of the collectives that were doing it. And mind you, they did all of this stuff free. I mean, as far as they weren't subsidized by anybody. So a lot of the guys would work, have a job, and the money that they had, they would put into it. So it wasn't for profit, and it was a very anti-establishment sentiment about this stuff. It was information for the people, by the people, and that's important because that's kind of like what Lowrider became, or that was the goal of it, was to continue the mentality of work like this, but on a more widespread appeal, to move out of that small category of people and get into the wider community, but to carry those ideas or philosophies or ideologies into the community. And it gets produced much in the same way. So yeah, Trucha was about 70, 71. I get different times from him sometimes, or also in written down. So roughly I would have to say probably 71. Yeah. But it wasn't his last publication. After this, he did another one that was San Jose Community News. It says sedition on it. And that one was a move away from all of the more political, radical stuff into branching out into having sponsors or how would you say, advertisement. So they changed the name of it. It wasn't so provocative like these would be, to allow more readership, to kind of fool people into looking at it, or having people against it because of the name. You know. So, but that did have advertisements, and maybe we'll talk about this, but they would start to advertise dances and things in it. But
Yeah, so it's interesting to see that there's like this evolution from a print media perspective, right, where he gets the community involvement type of perspective in there. Then it gets into, like you're saying, it moves towards advertisements. So you kind of have to change a little bit in terms of to be able to attract advertisers. So what do you think then was the spark to jump from going from like the Trucha magazines and then getting into Lowrider magazine? Like, did he ever say, or just be, obviously he was in the Lowrider community, right? And he sees it evolving
Right.
and happening and progressing, but no one's documenting it. right? So where is the point or the line that's drawn? He's like, I need to do something here.
I've heard a couple things from him. One of them was that in 1972, so in 72, 73, around, I think around 72, he was the representative for La Raza Unida Party here in the Santa Clara County. And he was speaking at an event. It was like September 16th, I believe, or something. But it was a bunch of high school students for like a Raza Day or something, or a convention for the party. And when he says there was like 10,000 students there. And at that point, he realized, again, back to who he is, unity through community, right? Why am I only gonna have one friend when I can have 10 friends? And so when he saw all the people together, he thought about moving out of the small niche of activism into the greater community, right? And of course, the lowrider scene was picking up again in its cycles, right? The hydraulics were coming out and all this stuff in the early 70s. And he sees the enthusiasm of it, and he's taking part of it, documenting things through flyers for dances, taking pictures of cars, putting them on posters, and maybe we can talk about the philosophy of that kind of stuff too in a bit.
Sure.
But so in a way, it's getting documented like that. And he notices that the cars, it's American culture, right? And so the cars are an important thing that people are gravitating to again. And so that's kind of like the vehicle for it, right? If you see everybody wearing a Raider shirt and you got a message you want to point across, well, maybe you can add the Raiders to it somehow, and that way people will look at it, right? At you in advertisement, that.
Right.
You got to grab them with something. And so I think that was the vehicle that united the community, and it would be the lead-in for a bigger thing, to put your message out there, which was again unity through something that everybody appreciated, right? Because in those days, I want to say, in my opinion, that there wasn't so much division within the community as there is now. We have a lot more options and distractions to do, right? You have different types of music, you have different kinds of subcultures, all this and that. But at that time, 1977, 76, when that work was going on, there still wasn't a whole lot of diversion within the community as far as what they were into. It was kind of like street people, college people, and then maybe the more immigrant people or something, Because I know in my time, I'm not that old, but I'm 52, and when I was growing up in the 70s in school, it seemed like that to me, that there was less separation amongst people. It was kind of like, yeah, we were all Chicanos and things like that, and the cars were just like, it was just part of the culture, right? It wasn't like, oh, you're a lowrider. I seen it change where the cars became associated with negativity and gangs and things like that. But I was kind of like, because it didn't make sense to me why you have a nice car and be in a gang,
Right. Well, part of that has to do with the
media, of course,
thing that he was working in, right?
Right.
Which is media, and trying to show a different perspective to what the popular media was showing about these cars.
Exactly.
And what these Chicanos were doing and messing up traffic and this and that, right? And that's really not what it was about. That's what he was documenting at the time.
And a big thing about that was, of course, there was nothing in the media, again, we're talking about the 70s, mid 70s, that really portrayed Latinos, Chicanos specifically in our area, in a positive or an inclusive light, right? It's to me, it hasn't really changed a whole lot. I mean, whenever you see a movie and there's a person of Mexican descent or Chicano, whatever you want to call them, and then all of a sudden you hear the flamenco guitar, or they have to have something that's very ethnic, or you go to their house in the movie and the house is all different colors. Like those are cool, whatever, but we don't all live that way. And there's a lot of variety within the people themselves, right? We're not homogenous like that. And whenever they caricature them in the movies or TV shows, it seems kind of not real.
Right.
Which is why the editorial for the first magazine was about Chico and the Man, right? It's like, it wasn't from our people. It didn't represent us very well. They had the nice Gypsy Rose in there, but that was about it, right? None of the actors were from that area or involved with anything like that. And here it is, that's us on TV. We're not doing it. Or Boulevard Nights, a lot of people like that movie. It was made by people who weren't from the community either.
Right.
And some of the actors were Chicanos or whatever, but it was still a major production company's view of how they see us, right? And of course, it had a heavy gang thing. It did kind of diverge from the whole lowriders and gangs being the same people because there was a two stories going on, but still the gang thing like overshadowed the unity of the cars. And in my opinion, that's my opinion.
You know, there's the only video clip that I've seen of your dad is in, it was actually playing on here a little while ago.
Okay.
It was the Low and Slow documentary.
Oh, okay.
And he says on there that he believes that the Aztecs were the original lowriders. What do you think he meant by that? He doesn't really get into it, but I believe it's such a powerful statement to say, and that they included it in that final editing.
Right.
And there's so many ways to get into that, right?
I would say, well, that was in '78, and it was a NBC,
Yeah, it was like a local
short documentary in LA. Well, it was LA, San Jose, and everywhere, but they contacted them and they wanted to do like a, what's going on with all these lowriders. It was kind of a thing. So, and I believe what he said was that it was the Aztecs were responsible for it or something like that, right? But what I think he meant was as far as the art. Now, along with communications being important to my dad, art was a big thing. He considered himself an artist. He always kept himself up to date with different means of production and whatnot. And I mean, they were kind of doing guerrilla, productions back in those days, what we would call that now, cut and paste, and the way that things were done back then. But he always kept himself updated to what was going on. So when I heard that and I see that, I think what he means is the art aspect of it. That the colorful cars, the modification of the cars, uh, that is from our indigenous roots. Not necessarily the Aztecs, but just in general, our people are colorful. I mean, look at this is something that was done by in that vein, and it's very colorful, which is not much different than the cars, right? Especially in the '70s with all the different speckles and colors that they had, or the patterns that they had in their cars at that time. A lot of the bars and kind of Greca kind of stuff. Uh, and so he attributed it to that. Same thing, he attributed tattoos and body art and all that kind of stuff. He thought that modifications were all part of us emulating the beauty of nature and presenting ourselves that way in a sense of connecting ourselves to nature. So I think that's what he meant by that.
Okay, nice. So you talk about the evolution, right? You brought up the changing of Lowrider magazine. One thing that sticks out to me as an artist is that he developed Arte del Barrio, right? Because I guess there were so many people sending in illustrations, and he decided to
Put
do
them
an
up.
offshoot. Is that how that?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, there was some times where they would ask for do contests. They had a bunch of different contests in the magazine. It would be like a writing contest or doing an essay on the Magon brothers, which actually there's one in here. And it was one of the inspirations for the creation, going back to Trucha, one of the inspirations for the creation of that was the law students at Santa Clara, I want to say. I'm pretty sure it was Santa Clara, wanted to do exposition on the Magon brothers. Some people consider them the founders of the Mexican Revolution, among other anarchists and stuff. So they approached him about publishing it in La Palabra, but that magazine was already, the production had folded already on that. They couldn't do it anymore. I think they lost their printer. And because again, it was all grassroots, right? And so they approached him about it, and he ended up, the deal was they would give him some money to produce, and he put it in there. So that first edition actually has the Magon story in there. It's two parts, maybe like 3 or 4 pages of it. But they would do writing contests about them, or have the Pintos send in their artwork because they were getting the magazine in jail too. And so I think it kind of just caught on, and people would send him stuff to publish in the magazine, and there was a lot of it. Like that's a memory that I have would be that he would be in the LA house, and I would look at all the artwork, and I learned all the LA, Picassos, whatever, because I would see all the artwork, and I'd look at, oh, dude, this one's from San Jose, and then like there was like 50 from LA, all these different things. So that was something that I remembered. So I remember the boxes of artwork that he would have.
Yeah, I think what a lot of people forget is how influential Lowrider magazine was to creating these offshoots, right? Like brought in Teen Angel, right? And we all know how popular and widespread Teen Angel was. But, basically they brought him up here to work for the magazine, I believe.
right? And my understanding is that he was one of the people who sent in stuff at first.
Initially.
Yeah, and he got recognized through that. And eventually, he made contact with my dad, and he got hired. You know, but yeah, it was. To my knowledge, I think it's still the only original that is inclusive of regular people. You look at the Cuvo and all of them. There's a lot of celebrities and things in there,
Mm-hmm.
but I think Lowrider still had the most neighborhood people in it because that was part of their mission, right? When they started to do their distribution into neighborhoods, that was something they included, and that would inspire the local, hoods or car clubs to want to do it because they would put people from the neighborhood that were deemed or like, oh, look at this is Johnny's Liquors, and everybody goes to the liquor store, put the liquor store guy in there, right? And so that it gives the feeling of being included, being represented, and that goes back to the whole thing of it being from us for us because it includes your neighbor. Your mom might be in it, you know, the guys on the street or whatever. They would go into neighborhoods where there would be gangs or something, and they would, through diplomacy, maybe put a gang picture in there of the guys next to something, not promoting the gang violence, but just kind of to include the neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
and that way they could open the door for circulation or publication in their local store, or and that was the same thing they did with the car clubs. We want to do something here. We want peace, so we could put your club in the next magazine or something. It was like through negotiations, and again, it goes back to who he was as a person, right? That was the vision that he had, was to continue the unity that he had moving from Fresno to here, Parlier from here. And at that time, there was a lot of migration of people from the area, the Central Valley. And so my dad would hang out with them. And they were moving all over San Jose. And at that time, San Jose, is, from what I understand, was very neighborhood divided: west side, north side, east side. And so because the Central Valley people were all over, right, that they would click together and form friends in those neighborhoods, and they developed Cardenalismo, basically the brotherhood of bringing the people together so that they can have functions together. They can have a party in the north side, and the guys will come from the other areas, and there's not going to be a problem, right? No set tripping, as you would say. And that mentality is what they took out on the street to promote the magazine, right? Is you include the people, and you tell them, hey, this is for the betterment of everybody, and you're part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants to be famous because, again, like we said, back in the 70s, there was no media representation of us. So that was a vehicle that was communicating, again, we're here. This is us. This is not the guys from Universal City or Universal Studios showing us who we are. It's actually us in there, right? With the cars that are part of it. And then within the cars, in the pages of the magazine, there's other things that are put in there that you might notice, things about what's going on in the schools, articles about Mecha, articles about police brutality, what's going on, in LA, or how the media and the police are scapegoating cruising as gang oriented, and like a classic thing I want to bring up speaking about this. I know I go off on tangents, I'm sorry, but
It's all good, man.
something in Arizona that I learned about was I guess when they went to do a super show in Arizona, they were against it. The people that were the local governments and stuff, they didn't want it to be there because they were saying, the sheriffs were kind of saying that the gangs were going to invade Arizona, from California, and this and that. So they kind of outsmarted them by doing it on a Native American reservation.
Is this the first super show over there?
Yeah, the Arizona show.
The very first Arizona.
I believe it was on the Papago or the Pima reservation or something. Or yeah, it was in Tucson around there.
Well, I mean, getting back.
But that goes back to San Jose State because my dad, when he used to do the dances, he would. I mean, not only was he an activist involved with all the different organizations at the time, I have to say, United People Arriba, La Confederación. He had friends in the Black Berets and all the different things. He had his brother-in-law and his best friend were in the Chicano Film Institute. It was like all these things were going on at that time. So I have to say, as part of San Jose history, I have to mention some of those groups. There's a lot more. I'm sorry if I'm forgetting, but I'm up on stage, under pressure. But that was something that he would do when he started doing dances also, promoting dances for charities and things like that, for like CAP, which is Community Alert Patrol, which was kind of like Cop Watch in those days. They used to go around and follow the police and document how they treated the predominantly in the east side, how they were pulling people over and what they were doing. They were filming them, taking pictures, taking notes, passing that information to the Casa Legal, and they were defending these people and putting out lawsuits and things like that. And so he used that grassroots mentality to promote dances because he figured, okay, well, San Jose PD is harassing the dances that we're doing. I'm going to put them on campus. Fred Ross Sr. turned him onto that because he's like, you can use the Mecha organization to have school sanctioned dances, and you can invite the neighborhood. Because again, right, he's all about community. So yeah, we're having a dance for something that San Jose State or for an activist thing, but he invites the community, all his friends from all the different sides of the neighborhood, and that was something that he was known for, was that he brought people to your thing, the regular people. So again, I keep going back to this because that's what Lowrider did, right? And this is where it comes from. It's him. It was his personality, and he got people to work for him that believed in that, or maybe like-minded people, and that's how they did it, more or less.
And I think that's where like the soul of Lowrider magazine, you can feel it, like you can read it when it's like those first, I don't know, maybe first year or two of those issues that came out. It's like a Chicano yearbook of everything that was happening. Cousins and family members were featured in these magazines, and when you look at El Excentrico, and for anyone who wants to look it up, the library digitized like 12,000 copies of El Excentrico.
It was donated to the library by the owner, or actually his son.
Yeah, and that was just like, it would feature family members, weddings. My wife's family's in there, featuring their wedding, and have these write-ups, and you feel like the homely nature of this document. And
it's from like the 30s and the 40s,
right? Exactly.
Up to, I'm not
My
sure when.
was in it.
Yeah, all the way until the 90s, I believe, or something. How long did it go?
And so when you pick up that first issue of Lowrider magazine, it's like it reads very, very similar.
And that's why I brought it up in the beginning, because that again was one of the inspirations for the format of it, and or the same thing with the activist stuff. So it's like a combination of the two.
Right. Yeah, it's like a perfect combination of the two, really, exactly. Because he's bringing in that community aspect, like you said. That's why I love, because I collect a lot of these magazines, and people will tell me, oh, my cousin's in issue 13, page 8, right? They know exactly like where that picture is at, because that's how that publication was. Right.
I mean, I was a little bit young, but my older cousins, like Augie and my other cousin Joey, who has the Cisco Kid Band, they have their own little spots in there. Yeah. I think one of Joey's advertising the jacket, and my cousin has the V-neck sweater, and not suede. What was that stuff?
Velour or something?
Like velvet.
Oh, okay.
The velvet V-neck things, and they're in there. I think my aunt, her boys are in a Gaonda thing, So yeah, a lot of my family's in there, and they were also involved in it, right? My one of my aunts was part of the office or administration kind of thing. She did a lot of stuff in financing and just in general stuff. He would have family members, if they lived in different areas, do the networking over there. They're all involved with it, which is why a lot of people are kind of like, man, what's up with their family and the magazine? It's like, well, they were all involved, so they feel, like it's part of them.
Yeah.
Through my dad, but even my Uncle Rudy, he was part of arts and entertainment, and I think he's got 2 covers. One of them by Teen Angel, and the other one was by another artist, I forget his name, but he's got a zoot suit on. It's a green cover, June '79.
So those early issues were very much a family affair.
I believe so, and again, my dad had all the publishing experience by the time he did Lowrider, so he was really hands-on about the first, especially in the first half of the two different volumes. So a lot of the articles he wrote, he did the layout, the publishing, he did the layout and how things were going to be in his house in Capitola at that time, because when the magazine came out, he was living in Santa Cruz, or Capitola, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Yeah, he wasn't here anymore. He had moved out, I think, in '75. Yeah.
So how do you feel that the magazine evolved over the years? Because obviously it sold a couple times later on to different companies, but how do you see that his impact into the magazine had influenced that evolution?
He established the brand. You know, it's when Albert came back. So you know, the original Lowrider ends in December '85. My dad was kind of, you know, he kind of lost the vibe, so to speak. You know, he really enjoyed the beginning part of it. You know, the first 3 years, 3 4 years, whatever, when they were establishing everything because of the excitement, the thrill of it. You know, my dad was really into self empowerment and creating his own way. I mean, I think he's only had one real job. Everything else that he did after that was self sustaining. You know, he was always creating something or being involved with different things through the community or whatnot, not necessarily a 9 to 5 job. Um, and so I think when it became just work, after they did the pioneering work, he kind of, I think you want to say that it was different for him. And so when the magazine, you know, had its little issues and debt and whatnot, and it ended in '85, Albert came back in '88, released it out back again. But he approached it from a professional point of view as far as distribution and things like that. Because mind you, like again, Lowrider was kind of produced the same way that these were, which was grassroots. The people who were involved were the ones who distributed it. So all the people that worked on staff and whatnot were the ones who were going out into the neighborhoods and delivering the magazines and stuff like that. So that's very taxing, right? And so he kind of eliminated that and made it more, I guess, in the sense of a traditional production using technology and whatnot. So I think maybe he was able to focus on just putting it out there rather than all the other stuff. So it really took off in the '90s, right? Um, but to me, that's a different magazine.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to the outsider, you might look at it and be like, "Oh, it's kind of similar. There's something to it," but it doesn't feel like home to me when I see it. The older stuff is what I feel like at home because it's my father, and you know, my family was involved with it, so I relate to that just in the sense of warmness in a way, you know. And I know like the newer magazines, they had a little bit of the old stuff, not so much, but it was still there. I think there was still dedications in the '90s, and there was still uh, you know, little stories about neighborhoods and things like that. But there just wasn't as much homeness or maybe a spirit to it. It was a little bit more commercialized. Lots of ads and things like that. You know, the original magazines had a lot of localized ads, especially the first couple of years, a lot of San Jose stuff. So it really felt to me that it was home, you know.
So in your opinion then, and I also invite the audience to think about this, is why do you think that San Jose was the perfect place to launch that magazine?
Oh, because of the because of
San Jose.
I mean these are things that I even popped up on my own, and I would talk to my dad, and we had the same conclusion. I'd be like, yes, you know. I think it goes back to the old north-south thing. When I mean, those of us that are from here, when we're growing up, right? We see all the people in LA. What's wrong with them? They're mad. They're angry. They have a history of all this racialness going on over there, segregation and by the housing. Well, we had that too. Don't get me wrong, but because of the '60s and the '70s, all of the movements that happened here kind of created the image, you know, or the stereotype that we have up north of we're a bunch of hippies and laid back and this and that, you know. And I experienced these kind of things when I was growing up. I would go to LA and you know, I'd be there with my hiking shoes. And they're like, why are you wearing hiking shoes in the city? And I was like, oh, that's right. I mean, we have stuff all around us up here, and you guys have to go all over the hills to the desert, you know, so it's different. And I think the mentality of the area also had a big effect on that. So we didn't have the history of all the established gang and car club, social club stuff that LA did. You know what I mean? In LA, you can't walk through certain neighborhoods, and car clubs are territorial. They don't trust other people because they went through a lot of stuff up to that point, and I don't think San Jose really had that, right? And so it was easier for people like my father to unite people,
Mm-hmm.
and that is what created that environment of coming together because in general, the cruising era was people, not just car clubs sticking to themselves doing things. It was people were just all over the place. And like when they had the first lowrider happening, they did work in the communities to bring all the car clubs together to invite them all to Gilroy, and it was pretty much a representation of Northern California. And LA couldn't do that; they would fight. Their mentality was different. The experiences they had were different. And I think because we didn't have the established history that they had, it was kind of a fresher slate. And then we had the movements of the civil rights movements that were going on that affected it also, the mentality of people.
Mhm.
I mean, that's my opinion also. And so it made it easier to bring people together and celebrate that way.
So you brought up the first happening. Can you talk about that? Because I don't know if a lot of people know how Lowrider kicked off through a big car show, right?
Yeah.
And like, that's where they photographed the first cover.
Right.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so the first lowrider happening was in November 21st, 1976, and it was a work in progress, or the accumulation of work. My dad and his associates, Larry and David and other people that worked with him, they went to all the areas and continued kind of like when I mentioned that my dad was and his friends were kind of uniting the San Jose neighborhoods, so that people could get together in peace. They kind of took that philosophy and they applied it to Northern California as far as car clubs. So they would go to these cities, people were that knew their cities, they can go there and connect with the car clubs and basically give them the spiel about this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to unite, all the car clubs to a larger community and share our culture with each other. And so as they went to the different areas, down in Salinas and San Jose area, even a little bit from Sacramento, they worked on that. And finally, when they felt that it was time, my dad decided that he used to work with the trabajador, excuse my Spanish, trabajadores adelante, or I believe that's what it was. In Gilroy, they had a co-op farm, and it was kind of like teaching people how to farm, creating solidarity with the farmers through students and things like that. So he used that connection for the spot because Gilroy was central to all the different areas where the Chicano community lived. And so they planned a happening there. And happening, for those of you who don't know, is kind of like when they didn't call them car shows, they called them happenings at first. And it was kind of like when the cars would come and just hang out. So we had them here in Allen Rock Park and Halyard Park. Those were like the San Jose spots for smaller happenings that were every weekend from the people. But they started to be organized and people started to do them, to organize those events. And so the one in Gilroy was kind of like one of the first where they invited people from different cities and the local areas of the Northern California to attend. And my dad had the idea that that would be the coverage for the first issue, the events of that, and then some other stories that he wrote. But that's where the cover comes from, and a lot of the content in there. And it established the magazine so that they could take that magazine to LA and to Santa Barbara area, wherever else they went, and show that this is what we're doing. This is what you can be in. This is what the goal of it is to create a united lowrider nation, so to speak. My dad used to say the lowrider nation because people would say Raider Nation. But so that was the vision was to show that and kind of also showcase the Chicano entrepreneurship of the businesses that were advertised in there, the hydraulics, the spokes, and haircutting salons, and all the DJ shops, whatever was advertised in there, to show that we have to be respected as such, and the power of our economics.
Mm.
We're not just a bunch of ignored people to be ignored. That we have a presence also.
So before I open it up to the audience, last thing I want to ask you is the logo.
Okay.
The logo man logo, right? Because I know that it's very important to you to make sure that the story is straight. You kind of look like the Lowrider man logo. But yeah, can you talk about how it went from the very first issue and to how it got refined and all that?
So the logo, as I understand it, was created by my father and Antonio Perales. Antonio Perales actually worked with my dad in Trucha. He did some of the art layouts in there. So he's known him from that time. He was an activist also during those days. So those two, if do you have a picture of the first issue?
No.
Okay, so in the first issue, it's kind of similar to this, and I was even telling my wife that that was the mentality of my dad. It was still radical or militant or whatever because there's no date, no price, nothing on there, right? You can look at it like, what is that? Is that a poster or a magazine? Because it doesn't have the normal stuff like those do. It's a little bit kind of like Consafos even doesn't really have anything. So that's how the first edition or first issue of Lowrider magazine looks like. There's no date. Well, there's the date on the bottom, but there's no price on it. And so for the next ones, they figured, okay, well, we got to put $1 on it. But my dad didn't want to ruin the page of it or the artwork of it, the aesthetics of it. And so they started playing with it. And at first they started off with $1. And then he said, well, put a hat on it. So they put a hat on it. And they said, circle in the zeros for the $1. And they said, wait a minute, let's put a mustache on it. And so that's kind of like where it came from. And my dad used to wear Panama hats. So they say it kind of like, oh, maybe it resembled him. And then so that was the first version of it. It was very rustic, simple line kind of drawings. And then when Joe Hernandez came aboard in '78, I believe, he refined it. So he made it more, I don't want to say cartoonish, like to take away from it, but he designed the '78 calendar, which I really like that calendar because it's very realistic, and he made that logo into a person, right? You see the guy in there, he's got his Panama hats, he's got his shades on it. And so he kind of made the logo like that. He filled out the hat, made the glasses, and so he was the one that kind of created the one that everybody knows, or the older people we know, the older logo, because they have a different logo now. It's more squarish or straight. And that was the original one that Joe Hernandez did. So there was two artists, my dad and Antonio Perales, and then Joe Hernandez in '78. And then I think he refined it again in '84 or so, or '83. It was a different one. That's when it starts to be square. He put the Panama hat back on him.
Yeah, so actually, if you go to before you leave, take a look at the first issue. It's in the foam board right here at the entrance, and you can see what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then also in the dining room area, there's also another copy of Lowrider magazine, the first issue you can check out, so you can see how it used to look in the very beginning.
Right.
All right, so let's open it up for questions here from the audience. Anything that you would like to have Mario answer? Don't be shy.
Not a question, an anecdote. I went with your father to a press conference, the Lowrider magazine in San Francisco, La Fuente, and I met my husband there. It's been 40-something years.
All right.
Bring people together.
Yeah, still bringing them together.
Back there? Yeah. See the hammers.
What town did you say your father was born in?
Yuma,
Arizona.
Arizona. Yuma, Arizona.
Yuma, thank you.
Over here. Pops.
So, your uncle, your deal Willie,
Yeah.
he made some music, right?
Yes.
Came out with the hit Cruising Baby. And that was a pretty good hit during that time.
Yeah.
I know there was a couple songs that I don't know that were really published, but is there some songs that you know about that haven't been out there, put out there, or not?
Yeah, he recorded some songs, and we have a CD in the family. But other than that, I think if a lot of the stuff that was recorded of him by other people, like my uncle from my mom's side he was his compadre, and he recorded his stuff all the time, whenever he would play. So, but as far as I know, there's no official recordings of anything. So, I mean, my dad was the one who worked with them to put that out, and they had the cover had a teen angel drawing on it. Yeah. So Lolita Records was my dad's thing.
Yeah, right.
Thank you for this. This is great. We did a Lowrider happening when I was in high school, Tennyson High School in Hayward, and remember we were organizing it, and your father helped us promote it, and we thought we were going to have like 500 people there. We ended up having like 3,000. And we were like, we're 16, 17 years old putting on these events, and it was like the best. I think it's the only Lowrider happening that happened in Hayward, but I guess and for those of us that grew up in that era, have Instagram or Facebook or cameras. And
Right.
so seeing the history and seeing ourselves there was a big deal.
Right.
And I'm just wondering, is there any effort to kind of bring like an exhibit or to the museums of, I mean, I'm in one of those issues and I'm trying to find the earliest, like maybe the second or the third issue from as a car show judge. And is there any work to put some of that together and exhibits here in the Bay Area? Because you're right. I mean, everything you said is really true. I mean, from Hayward to San Francisco to Gilroy to, all over the Bay Area. We would come to Story and Key Cruise, and it was like, I could get from Hayward to San Jose to Story and Key in like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, traffic was not the way it is now,
Right.
So we remember the Bay the way, it was back in those days. So any efforts to kind of bring some of this back? And there's so many of us that, this is our history and we don't see it as Latinos. We don't. It's not us, or it's it's gang-like or whatever. But it was like, so many car clubs that were just influenced by Lowrider magazine and
Right.
just coming together, like you said, like comunidad.
Right. There's quite a few different things, different kind of stuff happening all over, kind of like a renaissance, as you call it. I would say about the past 10 years or so. I see a lot of activity. My dad was fortunate to catch the beginning of it, but he passed away when it really got going. I know that here or over there in San Jose, at the library, they did 2 events that kind of had a lot of that. I was invited to speak for him over there too, and speak on some of the stuff. But as far as that, anything from Lowrider, I mean, Lowrider is its own entity. My dad doesn't have anything to do with that anymore. Like I said, in '85, he ceased any connection to it. So from what I understand about them is they're kind of the new ownership and they got some new structure going on. They're kind of trying to move in that direction, so maybe we'll see something as far as what they have or what they can do. As far as what I personally, I'm trying to share things that my father was involved in, and starting at a smaller level, I guess, a grassroots level. Things like this can help out, or being involved in other events that I've been part of to spread the word, But I believe it's a good idea, and I think it's because the generations were now being nostalgic of our past, right? And I include my generation because, like I said, I grew up in the '70s, so I feel connected to a lot of that older stuff. I was young enough to see it. I was old enough to see it. How's that? And see all the Story and King cruising. I'm from the east side of San Jose also, and took part in it in the late '80s, early '90s before I became, followed my other path. But so it's nostalgic to me too, and I feel like the people my age and older are kind of reclaiming that, like that, like they say, you always go back to your roots, and so I see a big movement for that, and there's a lot of different things happening. So I would just say keep an eye out, So
Yeah, I think along with that, it's not Lowrider Magazine specific, but I know that Sacramento at the California History Museum are having the first Lowrider all California exhibit that they're putting together right now. But I think that it's an important point to bring up because San Jose, where other place would they have a lowrider museum than San Jose, right? It started here. Story and King was the biggest place to be in Northern California, right? Aside from probably Whittier Boulevard. But the magazine started here, right? The idea of documenting our people started here. And so I think we need to pay homage to that. And the only way you can really do that is by rallying behind somebody that could be the face of that. I'm looking at you know what I'm saying? To try and get something like that moving forward, right? The little exhibits are great, but they're temporary, right? Yeah.
So I was a lowrider back in '74. I had a '65 Chevy Super Sport, and I think we really helped a lot with a lot of youth like myself were able to buy those cars. Now you can't buy them unless you spend a lot of money. And then I remember cruising down on Story and King, and it was just a pile of driving. Everybody was just driving, having fun.
Yeah.
After they closed it down, because the police really did get involved and they did close it down, I remember we were trying to look for other places to go do the same thing downtown First Street. That didn't work out very well. The police were there too, and then just kind of got out of it. But I was really fascinated about your father, how he transitioned from one magazine to another magazine, kind of focusing on different themes. And then like the Lowrider at that time, like 77, 74, 75, 76, it was really a very, in our community, it was very popular. A lot of us used to buy it, and we were wondering how come he sold it, and what was his thoughts about what did he do after that in terms of after it became much more marketable product as opposed to a focus in the community.
Well, I mean, again, he had to let go of the magazine out of debt. The magazine incurred debt with the printers, and then the printer folded too. So that's how Albert got it, because he bought the debt basically and started his own operation, and he kept the same name. I think my dad he was surprised and would still be surprised that it's still going. You know, it's like it keeps coming back. But you know, who knows what he really feels deep down inside. I'm sure he considered it his baby. You know, and so I'm sure he's like, wow, you know, because it's something that he created. You know, like I'm his baby too, but that's just different. You know, and I would say that he's probably really proud. But, you know, all in all, he would have to be proud. You know, that's still to this day, it still has its legacy. You know, and just like in the '90s, I remember I thought it was fading away, it came back, and then in 2000s, I thought it was fading away, and it came back, and it's back again. It's like, wow, you know, I've been being invited to come out and share, you know, words about him everywhere, and I'm just like, man, if he would have known that was going to happen, you know, how would he feel about that? You know.
Question over here.
Yep.
Go ahead, Al.
My name's El Castellano, and Montalvo is one of my neighbors. I live right across the street and I'm a regular customer of Montalvo's, and I've been after them for I don't know how many years on functions that I attend here to get the rest of the community to do functions here, and they're finally getting white. They have other ethnicities of the community have served here, but what happened here today, this is the biggest presence of Latinos in this organization here in the last 23 years that I've been here.
Before we wrap it up,
Here's one more.
oh, there's another question? The last one before we close here. Yep.
Oh, hi. My name is Paul Soto from Barrio Horseshoe. Thank you for having the discussion. You gave a lot of information that really contextualized Lowrider Magazine. I do historical preservation work in the city of San Jose, and I'm very proud of the fact that the community was able to come together to acknowledge the building that served as the first headquarters for Lowrider Magazine. And this is significant to Lowrider history, is because it's always associated with the east side of San Jose, whereas the office that served as the headquarters is on Willow Street. And at the same very meeting, we were able to get Sacred Heart Church acknowledged as a historical landmark because of the Chicano priest and Father Anthony Soto's activity within Sacred Heart Church. These two buildings happen to be across the street from each other. It's beautiful. It's beautiful in the sense that it is establishing the Chicano movement, the Lowrider movement, and the movimiento within the priesthood was very active on the west side of San Jose. And so that's critically important to the overall history of not only the magazine, but the movimiento. With that said, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the Lowrider movement's connection to gentrification, to the oppressive conditions in Sasipuedes, and the relationship between Barrio Sasipuedes and the Lowrider movement in terms of an expression and a statement and reclamation of the space, considering that California was established by the declaration of war of the United States against Mexico. That how much do you see the Lowrider movement as the extension of the farm workers movement and the Chicano movements? That would be my first question. My second question is what can we do as a community to continue to honor the legacy that was left by your father and left by Confederación de la Raza Unida, Las Mujeres de Aztlán, Sofia, Ernestina, all of our elders, so that in this era of gentrification, which means an ejection of a people from a space, how do we make certain, absolutely certain, that this cultura and this expression of the Chicano movement and us as a people does not gentrify out as well? So those are my questions. Thank you.
Well, I mean, as far as justification, don't sell your house. You know?
I don't have a home.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, that's a lot of questions. As far as just stay involved with your community, think in terms of your community. Right now we have the temptations to buy big box store stuff, Amazon, all this kind of stuff. When we're buying Amazon, all of our local neighborhood stores are closing. They're having all these problems because there's no more people coming in. So again, it's to me, it's just like staying connected to the earth, right? Before we lived in the earth, we lived in the dirt, basically. In a good way. I don't mean just like in a bad way, like you come from the dirt. No, we evolved ourselves to separate ourselves from our environment, and I think the same goes for like what you're talking about. We've separated ourselves from our community and for ease of trend or just ease of living. We want to buy everything, have it delivered to our house, or we want food coming to our house. It reminds me of that over-the-hedge cartoon and the little raccoons telling the other guys, look at all they do is eat. They have all this food. The car comes, it drops off food. They go to the store, it comes food. Everything was revolved around food. So I look at it as everything's revolved around ease of doing things, which is our natural instinct, right? But in turn, we're cutting ourselves off from each other and our world. Instead of talking to people face to face, we're Instagramming. We're choosing to buy online instead of go to a store and have a relationship with our neighborhood guy on the corner, who they used to talk to get into the neighborhood to give you the magazine. All of that's gone now. So we kind of just have to be careful and use these new mediums in a balance, right? To connect with each other, to promote what works for us or what works just for us as a culture, and not just because it's easy. Sometimes doing the right thing or the thing that has our future at stake is hard. It doesn't always have to be easy, right? So I would just say be aware of what we're doing and think of the consequences of our actions, not just in a negative way, but farther down the line. If we're going to drink water and put our bottles all over the place, well, guess what? Eventually, what are we going to do with all those bottles? They're all over the place. Now they're in the ocean. Or what do we think was going to happen with them? You got to put them somewhere. So just put yourself in your community and focus on what can you do and who you can be, and work with your community that's around you. And if we all do that, then we can be the change that we want to see. And as far as the other stuff, yes, the first printing shop / office, it wasn't really an office, they just used that address. It was my dad's friend who had a printing shop there down in the basement, and they printed the first, first 5 issues or so there, and then they moved to William Street. But there is the history of the Chicano Mexican American community in San Jose was in the west side. He's absolutely right. The freeways destroyed that. They went right through the middle of it, and then the east side came up because it was unused area. They put all the people there. So the only reason the east side is known is because it was new and it kept growing. It got bigger and bigger, whereas the west side kind of shrunk. And the north side at that time, I believe, was a little bit more mixed. But you had like the River Street, you had Dalmas to go all the way through. There was schools under the freeway. A lot of people got displaced at that time. So definitely all the different areas of San Jose need recognition. And also, like you said, the priests, Soto and the one who my dad was working with a lot was Moriarty. My parents lived 2 apartment complexes over from that church, which is how that happened, how that connection happened. And he developed a relationship with them, just like in Mayfair they had with the Guadalupe Church. And those churches served as centers for meetings, for dances that to benefit the community or to benefit any causes and things like that. So, yeah, those are also part of the historical San Jose, not just the east side. The east side is just kind of like LA gets all this credit for everything because it's big. Why did Lowrider move to LA? Because it has the population, it has the economic numbers, and I feel like it's the same thing with the east side. That's how I feel that it gets known for everything because there's more people to speak up. There's more of everything there versus north and west side. North side now is a lot of Chicanos, but at that time I don't think it did. More towards the First Street area. But yeah, I don't know what else. I forget.
It's just the connection between Sacipuedes, but you outlined that its connection in terms of the Chicano movement and the farm workers movement being an extension. Dr. Stephen Petey gave.
Okay, hold on. Not to cut you off, but to address that small part. So the Chicano movement in Mayfair with United People Arriba and whatnot, their connection to the farm worker movement is, of course, the CSO was in Mayfair. Where did Cesar Chavez come from? The CSO. So therefore, the CSO came to Mayfair, and with the Father McDonald, and Fred Ross, and from there they reached out and they found Cesar Chavez. And that was the beginning of the organizations there. And through them, they worked with Sofia Mendoza and Gil Mendoza and other people from the area that started to create the activism there. So these were the elders of the student movement. And relating back to my dad in that was, my dad was a bridge between that because yes, he was going to college and dealing with them, but then he was still coming back to the neighborhoods and bringing people from the neighborhoods into the movement. So the activism in Mayfair was different than the activism at the schools. It was community oriented. And so people like my dad were the bridge between the two. And so their connection to the UFW was because Cesar Chavez was from there. So Cesar Chavez was a friend to a lot of these people, and don't forget, when people just want to label him as a activist, a labor activist, it's like, no, he's one of the fathers of the Chicano movement because he was part of the CSO in that neighborhood, making changes in that neighborhood, and they were teaching a lot of people that maybe were involved with labor in that time to begin to become activists for your community and use the power of labor as a way to do that. And then eventually it just became, organizing your community the same way that they did. And the way that they organized that community was kind of the same way that Lowrider became what it became. They started off with one person and networked in those neighborhoods directly, door to door, seeking out people who were influential, So I think, does that address?
That is excellent. Thank you.
So before we get out of here, and I want to be mindful of everyone's time, the show's almost over at 4 o'clock, but I gotta ask this. What do you think your dad's opinion would be of the lowrider scene right now? Not just a magazine, but I'm saying, you said you brought up Renaissance, right? What do you think, and we'll end it with that?
I would say he would be very pleased. He was very pleased before he passed away, and he was having plans himself to do more things. Because basically, if you think about it, it became what he wanted. What their goal was to unite the people. And we look outside out here, it's bringing people together. And they're remembering, oh yeah, this is something that we can do to bring the people together. There's not people fighting outside and shootings going on. That stuff's not happening here. That we all make it home to our families and we share this, and it's still the same thing. And just like I was talking to David about this, and he was saying, who would have thought that this would have been here? I was like, exactly. They took Lowrider to places that it wasn't ever there. Who would have thought it would have been at the Super Show? 20,000 people showing up at the LA Convention Center. No, nobody had ever done that. Not as far as Mexicans. They put it up there, and they put it there because they were saying, look at all you guys that do your custom cars and fancy cars, we're here too. And you can't take that away from us. We deserve a first-class place, and we put ourselves there.
Beautiful, man. Thank you. Thank you, Mario. Thank you, everybody.